Hi, and welcome to the Trail Encounters. We are actually on episode 14 today, and it's been exciting so far. So our topic today is pretty interesting. I think you guys will really enjoy it. So have you ever saw something on social media that caught your eye and you thought, this is really great information, I have never heard of that before, and then come to find out that it's completely untrue? Well, we see a lot of that on social media these days, and sometimes it gets into the realm of Christianity and what Jesus talked about. And we've had some of those things come up recently, so it was something we wanted to address.
So yeah, this question came to us, which is kind of the point of the Trail Encounters. We were sent a video, and someone said, hey, have you heard about this?
Right.
And so watch the video, and we see so much stuff on social media today. And we often just kind of, we see, oh, that's interesting, and scroll past it, or we're like, oh, that's really cool, and we forward it. And not much thought goes into that other than kind of just scrolling by and seeing something interesting and so forth. However, there is a bit of a danger there, because when we forward things on, if we're not forwarding on something that's true or something that has maybe half-truths, we're kind of participating in that, right?
Yeah, it perpetuates it.
And it's not like an overly intentional thing. We're not like overtly deceiving anybody. It's just like, oh, that was cool, and we pass it on. And so today I want to talk a little bit about this video we received. And again, I don't want to run down the people or make fun of anybody or criticize them unjustly. I don't know them. I don't know what their walk is like with Jesus. I don't want to do that. But I do want to talk about how we can be better at interpreting these videos, analyzing them, thinking about them before we pass them on.
Yeah, especially those that have such an impact on what Scripture says.
Exactly. I mean, there is so much misinformation out there right now, and so many things being said that we need to kind of be careful that we have the truth. There's a lot of counterfeit stuff out there, and unless you know what the real thing looks like, you can't identify the counterfeit. So
exactly. Today
we're going to kind of just spend some time looking at what this video says and then asking, well, what does the Bible say about these things? By the way, we're not going to show the video because I don't want to, like I said, overly criticize anybody or make anybody look bad. That's not our intention here on the Trail Encounters. It's to help you better interpret the Bible and your world and your life. So again, we're not going to do that. We will quote it though. I did make a transcript from the video, so we'll use their words because we're looking at the reasons, the logic, the understanding, how they think about things, and then how we interpret that. So we're talking about reasoning, moral judgment, kind of the logic that goes into these discussions.
Right.
So that's where we're going to start. Okay. So the headline in this 3-minute video was this: the hidden meaning behind "My God, why have you forsaken me?" So I want to say a couple things here. First, when something says it's hidden, it kind of assumes that there's something that is not being revealed in the text. Like there's something that has been held back, and now whoever has this video is revealing it to us like as it's a new thing, right? And so we got to be at least skeptical when that comes up.
Right. I mean, because it is a natural thing for social media people to do catchy headlines to, get us our interest. But like you said, we do need to be discerning.
That's a great word. Yeah, discerning. So is this just, to get us to click on it, or is there some true revelation going on here? Because again, one of the intentions of God's word is to reveal God's truth. Like who Jesus is, what he came to do, what he taught, right? Who is the God of the Hebrew Bible? Those kinds of things. And so if there's hidden things, then it kind of defeats the purpose.
Right. I do see, though, that people might question, like, Jesus did talk in parables. Well, how is that different?
So he did. And in fact, if you take a look at the Gospels, like in Mark, for example, Jesus says, I teach them in parables because because the truth will be hidden from them. And in those cases, he's dealing with opposition, those who are kind of coming after him for what he's teaching. And so he goes away and he tells the disciples what these parables mean.
Right, which is revealed to us.
That's the other point. We have both sides of the conversation.
Right.
In the Bible, we have all of it. So in Jesus' context, when he was teaching, these crowds were following him and he's getting a lot of opposition, he kind of has to go away and teach the disciples separately, right? And so that kind of has this hidden component. But when we have the New Testament, the Bible itself, we have both sides of the conversation.
Right, so we shouldn't be looking for anything hidden more than what Jesus has revealed.
Right, and we're going to come to that point here about the apostles in a little bit, about how they kind of interpret things for us. The other side of this hiddenness is that there's a lot already for us to do. The texts of the Bible were written centuries and centuries ago by people living in a different land, in a different culture, using different languages.
Right.
And so there's a lot of interpretation to do already. So let's not make our task more difficult. We're looking for hidden things, right? I mean, just doing biblical interpretation, looking at language and what words mean and phrases mean and how it was contextualized in their world and then transferred to our context. That's a lot of really good, hard work that we should be doing. It's not looking for secrets. It's just looking for truth.
Right.
Okay. Let's take a look at the context of where this video is going. So again, the headline is, "My God, why have you forsaken me?"
Right.
So in Matthew's gospel, these are Jesus' words from the cross. So in Matthew 27, it says this: "From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?' That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So Jesus is quoting Psalm 22, the first verse. And that's kind of where this video is going to go. It's going to take a look at Jesus' words from the cross and how it points to Psalm 22. And this then is how the video opens. Again, this is a transcript from the video itself. So this is what the video says. Because Jesus wasn't just saying words. He was quoting scripture. He was pointing us to Psalm 22. Because Psalm 22 opens with the exact same words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But today, I want to focus on one verse in Psalm 22. Verse 6 says, "But I'm a worm and not a man." Okay, so that's what the video says. This is the beginning of it. So Jesus is quoting Psalm 22 in
Right.
Hebrew. In fact, those around him at the cross misunderstand what he's saying because he's using Hebrew. He says, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani."
Right, and they thought he was calling for Elijah, right?
Exactly. So they heard Eli and they thought Elijah. Okay. So he is referencing Psalm 22, at least the first verse.
Right.
Now, her assumption is that Jesus is referencing us back to the entire psalm. And that really is our first question.
Yeah.
Is Jesus referencing the entire psalm, or is he referencing just the first verse?
I've always thought that it's just exactly what he said is all he really wanted us to know. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, it is and it isn't.
Okay.
In the sense that we don't know exactly what he meant.
Well,
Obviously,
true.
we can't ask him. But in some ways, when he's pointing back to the 22nd Psalm, what about it is he pointing back to? Right? Is he saying that Psalm 22 is predictive of what's going to happen at the cross? Or is he identifying with those who suffer as in Psalm 22? Now, for me, I don't think Psalm 22 is predictive of the crucifixion. Someone disagree with me on that. And that's fair. But for me, I look at Psalm 22 as it stands in its own context. What did Psalm 22 mean at the time? And what about that would Jesus be referencing or be thinking about or calling out to from the cross?
So for those of you listening, Frank does have a very extensive background in study of the text. That you explain a little bit more.
So yeah, I do have multiple degrees, graduate degrees, historical linguistics, biblical theology. I studied Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic for years. So yeah, it's kind of what I really enjoy in studying these languages. But the point is not just to know the language, but to kind of bring that to the Bible, of course. And I'm also fairly conservative in my interpretation of biblical texts. I want to kind of stick to what the text says and not go kind of beyond that. So that being said, for Psalm 22, I'm first going to ask, like, what does it mean as Psalm 22?
Right.
Before I connect it to anything in the New Testament. And I'll come to that here in a minute about my views on how to do that. Again, that's my views, and you can kind of take it or leave it. But for Psalm 22, when you read the whole psalm, it's a psalm of a person who's suffering, who's faithful to God, who has all these enemies coming around him, and he's crying out to God for help, for protection, for rescue. And in the end of the psalm, he is rescued and he's thankful. So it's not just about the suffering, it's about the whole context of someone who suffers and feels abandoned by God, but then is rescued, which Jesus is resurrected, right? So, I mean, in a sense, Jesus may be identifying with this person, the author of Psalm 22, who feels abandoned and feels surrounded by enemies, which he's surrounded by enemies, but yet finds rescue and salvation in God. And so maybe that is the larger context of what Jesus is after. Like, you see me dying on the cross, I look forsaken, but I'm not. Like, God is indeed going to be with me and raise me up. So it could be that side of things too. So again, when we go looking for details, we don't want to miss the larger picture. If Jesus is referencing the entire psalm, there's a much bigger picture of, again, someone who was suffering and abandoned, but in reality, God was with them.
Well, and that's actually one thing I really appreciate how you study. I tend to look at the Bible verse by verse and try to, gain from that because I haven't studied it like you have. And you're able to see the bigger picture because you have studied the entire Bible, and you can pull out things, an overview, instead of just minute details.
Thanks.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
So, but yeah, and that by the way is the point. When you interpret the Bible, you kind of want to do it in its context. You kind of want to look at it itself before you run to a commentary or some clever idea or concept. Like, what does it say? Like, just look at it for what it says. Now, that being said, how does the New Testament reference Psalm 22? So the next question might be is, are there other places where the New Testament kind of references Psalm 22, and how? So let's do that. In Matthew 27, beginning in verse 39, we find this. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Now we find something similar in Mark 15 as well. Now this is not a direct quotation from verse 7 of Psalm 22, but again, the concept is there. So, is Matthew referencing Psalm 27, or is it just a similar happenstance where here's someone who is suffering and being derided by his opponents in Psalm 22, and Jesus is experiencing the same kind of atmosphere with those around him deriding him from the cross.
Right.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing we're looking at here. In Matthew 27, verse 43, it says that the chief priests, the scribes and elders, mocked Jesus, saying, "He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to. For he said, I am God's son." And in Psalm 22, verse 8, we read, "Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights." So again, not a direct quote, but the concept is the same.
Okay, so you're looking at where other places in the Bible have also quoted other places in the Bible.
Yeah, in this case, I'm not looking for the quote, just the concept. So again, is Matthew connecting to Psalm 22 in a more general way,
Okay.
or in a very specific way?
Gotcha.
And again, I think in the general sense, you have, again, someone who's suffered, feels abandoned, neglected by God, forsaken, and yet God is going to rescue. And so when you bring in all of Psalm 22, you got to bring in all of it and not just parts of it. So it seems like Matthew at least is referencing, maybe not directly Psalm 22, but the concept of someone who's being abandoned and then persecuted by those around them. Again, Matthew 27, verse 35. "And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots." And then Psalm 22, verse 18, "They divided my clothes among themselves, and for my clothing they cast lots." Now this is the one that seems very direct as well.
Yeah.
And we
it
find
does.
this statement in all four Gospels about the casting lots for clothing. Again, was this a general practice because clothing was highly valued? And so if someone's going to suffer and be killed, they'll take their stuff. I mean, that's kind of what they did. You would loot those that you conquered. As an army goes into a city, what do? They looted the city. So in a sense, again, this could be seen as general too, as opposed to a direct connection.
Right.
But Matthew, more than the other Gospels, as we've seen, seems to really have this connection to Psalm 22, at least to the sense of someone who suffers unjustly, is forsaken, and yet is rescued and justified. And maybe that was what Matthew's looking for here. So again, if you're asking me, I think that's what Matthew's after, as opposed to predictive texts. Now let me say this real quick. Yes, there are places, of course, where the New Testament references the Hebrew Bible, like we saw with Psalm 22 verse 1, or the dividing of the clothes. And they make these connections, right? Paul does it, the apostles do it, we see it in the Gospels. My general approach is that where the apostles make a connection to the Hebrew Bible, we should honor that connection and follow that connection, right? They're the apostles. They were there. They were taught by Jesus. We should follow their direction.
In case someone does not know what an apostle is, why don't you?
Okay, so I'm saying the apostles here are the 12 disciples of Jesus. Okay, well, the 11, exclude Judas. But the idea here is that the apostles were there. They heard these connections. Oh, by the way, I'm including Paul and James and other New Testament writers. I should say that. The New Testament writers make these connections. We should keep those connections and honor them. However, where they don't make a connection, like we're going to see here in a minute in our video, where they do not make a connection, I don't think we should either.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's just a conservative approach. We might find some really cool connections, but that doesn't mean that we should make them necessarily.
Well, at least not directly, like saying that this is what he wanted us to know.
Yes, exactly, because we're kind of stepping out on some dangerous territory there, because now I'm putting words in Jesus' mouth.
Right, exactly.
And that is really, really, for me, very dangerous. I mean, it's nice to find some cool little things here and there, but I want to take the texts very seriously and to honor them. And again, if the apostles or the New Testament writers make a connection, great, I'm all over it. But if they don't, I'm going to kind of say, well, that's interesting, and kind of leave it at that.
Gotcha.
So that being said, that's where we pick up our video. They specifically reference verse 6. And we don't have any reference to the New Testament back to Psalm 22, verse 6. So that fits in this category of like, kind of where is this connection coming from?
Right.
Was it intended, or are we making a connection that was not intended? So that's your second question. So first question, is there a connection to Psalm 22? Yes, in a more larger general sense perhaps. But verse 6, I'm not quite sure. So let's go back to our video and see what they say about verse 6. But today, I just want to focus on one verse in Psalm 22. Verse 6 says, "But I am a worm and not a man." She says, the common Hebrew word for worm is rema. But the word used in this verse 6 is not rema, but it is tola'ath. Tola'ath refers to a very, very specific type of worm called the crimson worm. What does Jesus want us to know about this crimson worm? See, that's where we get into a problem. So she says, what does Jesus want us to know about this crimson worm? Well, again, Jesus doesn't refer to a crimson worm. No one in the New Testament refers to a crimson worm. No one in the New Testament refers to verse 6.
Right.
So, again, what you've done is you've taken verse 1 of Psalm 22, which is quoted by Jesus from the cross, bringing in all of Psalm 22, which, again, we said is maybe not a bad thing. We can see the connection there. But then they go to just verse 6 and then imply that Jesus wants us to know about a specific part of verse 6. And that's where we find the break. So now we're like, okay, well, why would that be the case? And what are you trying to teach me about this crimson worm, and what does it mean? And again, now you're kind of putting words in Jesus' mouth. And that is where I'd be like, okay, I got to really pay attention here.
Right.
Okay. First, she claims that the word rima is the more common Hebrew word for worm. It's not. It's only used 7 times. The other word, tola'ath, is used much more often and refers to a worm or a grub. But it is also the word for scarlet or crimson. And so there was worms or insects, not necessarily worms, that produced like an acidic crimson material, okay? And that was used for the curtains, for example, in the tent of meeting, in the tabernacle. And so you'll find in Leviticus and Numbers many references to crimson using this word.
Okay.
But not necessarily connecting a specific worm or a specific insect. So the Hebrew doesn't support that connection.
So it's more talking about the color crimson versus the
worm in
insect
that
or
case.
whatever.
Right, exactly. Yeah. When it's talking about the curtains, it's talking about the color.
Okay.
So in a sense, the word can simply mean worm or grub, right? So the point of Psalm 22, I'm a worm, not a man, is not about a crimson anything. It's about, I feel like a worm, like the lowest of creatures, like under the ground, the thing that eats dead bodies. That's what I feel like. And so that's the context of Psalm 22. But she's connecting it to something very different. So
Right.
first off, her use of Hebrew is really incorrect, and what she's trying to say here is incorrect. Then she goes on to describe this crimson worm. But she quotes someone who's not a scientist, which makes us probably wonder, like, okay, well, is there scientific backup to what she's going to say about this crimson worm? Here's what she says. A crimson worm only lays eggs once in her lifetime. When her time has come, the crimson worm inches her way up a tree, and she adheres herself on the wood. As she takes her position and presses her body against the wood, she forms a hard crimson-colored shell, which welds her to the wood surface. Her choice is made, and is permanent. This is the position in which she spends the rest of her natural life. And it is there, under her body, under her instinctive protective crimson shell, that her children are born. And then the most peculiar thing happens. The children of the Tolath begin feeding on the living body of the mother for the next 3 days. And after 3 days, the crimson worm gives up her life. And as she does, one of the most profound events in all of nature takes place. From the body of the mother, a blood-red substance begins to flow that stains the wood to which she has been attached. The crimson worm has one purpose for climbing that tree: sacrifice. The only way for her children to live is for her to die.
Very interesting story.
It is an interesting story. And you can tell it's a bit embellished, right? Like the only purpose for her and this profound and, it's kind of being built up. Which again, by the way, is a signal to me that I need to kind of be paying attention, right? Okay, so scientifically, this is not the case. So most likely what she's talking about is the Coccus ilicis, which is an insect that kind of does something like this, where it does climb a tree. It does lay about between 1,000 and 2,000 larvae. It protects them and makes a shell over them, which is not unique to this particular insect. It does have a crimson shell, and it does die, now within 3 days, in some period of time, and to protect the young. So, it's sort of close, but not necessarily what's being described here, because what she's going for is, the climbing of the tree, attaching it to the tree, 3 days,
She
giving
wants
its
a direct
life.
connection to Jesus is what she's trying to make.
Exactly. And so the Hebrew doesn't support that, and the science doesn't support that, right? So here you've got a really kind of embellished story to make a point, but the theology and the science are both not true. Now some will say, well, yeah, but it's a nice story.
And it is, and nice stories are great. But when you're trying to put words into Jesus' mouth, that's where we really need to draw some lines.
Right, because remember, she said, Jesus wants us to know this. Well, if Jesus wants us to know this, then Jesus got the science and the theology wrong, right? And that's where I have a problem. We start putting things in Jesus' mouth, we become accountable for those things.
Right.
one more thing about this. She goes on and says this: Jesus Christ has one purpose in coming into this world: sacrifice. The only way for us to live is for him to die. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. Now, the end of that's a very true statement.
Absolutely.
He gave his life for us. We can't find life without him giving his life for us. Mm-hmm. However, that was not his only purpose.
Oh, yeah. So much more that he came here to do.
So much more. In fact, in our small group, we've been studying the Gospel of John. Mm-hmm. So I went back and looked in John, what does Jesus say about why he came? Well, here's a few examples. John 3, verse 17. Indeed, God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him. John 10:10. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Talking about the here and now. John 12:46. I have come as light into the world, so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in darkness. And then in verse 18:37, he says to Pilate, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth.
So Jesus is telling us about who God is. He's teaching us, he's training us in a lot of ways, and he's pointing us to God, that there's more,
Yeah, you have truth in this life. You have light in a dark world. You have hope now. I mean, all this he's bringing to us in the here and now. Mm-hmm. So yes, sacrifice is a huge part of why Jesus came, but not the only reason he came, right? He came to give us life, not just in eternity, life right here, right now. And we don't want to ever miss that.
Yeah, we want to live in hope now, because the world is such a dark place at times that it would be really hard to be just waiting for the end.
And in fact, Stacey, I'd say this: Jesus' kingdom, and he says this, Jesus' kingdom has already begun.
He does say that.
He says, if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, the kingdom of God is among you. It's right here. So we live in the kingdom now. Yeah, exactly. We are citizens of his kingdom right now. It'll be fulfilled when he returns, but it begins today. So we don't want to miss that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so passionate about something like this, that we want to make sure that we don't miss that very important point. He came to give us life. When? He'll give us life now. So this is the danger of these little videos. Again, great story, very passionately told. But again, it's putting words in Jesus' mouth. It's not giving the whole story, the whole truth, and is actually somewhat deceiving. And by the way, when you forward something on, you're in a sense teaching. You're giving assent to that. In fact, one of the reasons why we are doing the trail encounters and the trail. Now, the trail itself is the Bible reading program that we have to read the whole Bible in a year or 2 years. But we give commentary along the way. Every day we provide some commentary in the text because we want to help, each other to read the Bible faithfully. It's really important to us. So we see that here. And here's why. In the book of James chapter 3, it says this: not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. So there's a warning here.
There is. I know that's always a worry. Like, oh, okay, got to do this
right. We want to do the best we can to not just teach, but to help you teach. So that you think and reason about things that you pass along, because we're accountable for what we tell others. And it's really important to us that we present Christ as faithfully as we can. Yes, we'll make mistakes.
Right.
But we're doing the best we can to be faithful to the scriptures, to our traditions, those things that have been passed along to us. And that's kind of our goal here. And here's why. So, Stacey, if I were to ask you to tell your life story, right, to write your life story, we would call that an autobiography. You would tell your story. Now, let's say I was to tell your story. Would they be alike?
No, because you don't have every piece of thought that I have in my head.
Yeah, exactly, right? They're going to be a little bit different. So an autobiography, the story you tell about yourself, will be very different than the story that others tell about you, which is a biography, right? What's interesting about God's story is this: we don't get God's autobiography, right? God doesn't give us an autobiography. You know what he says? You tell my story. You give my biography. And there's an incredible responsibility in that.
Right.
That God says, I want you to tell my story. Get to know me well enough that you can tell my story. And that is a responsibility that we should take incredibly seriously. And we want to do that together. We can't just tell his story alone. We together tell his story.
And I do love that the Bible, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John who are telling the story of God from their perspectives. And then also Paul and so many people. But don't forget that we all have had encounters with Jesus and that he has worked in our lives. And that makes a difference. And our stories encourage others. So I think that's just a beautiful thing that God does and allows us to do.
In fact, I would say this. In many cases, you are the first Bible that people will read. Right? Your story with God will be the first Bible they read because they're going to see your life, and your life is telling a story. It's telling your story of God's story. And hopefully that story points them to the scriptures and to the stories of those who have gone before us.
Yeah.
So again, we hope this was an encouragement to you, just to kind of pay attention to what you see online, on social media, and an encouragement for you to continue to tell God's story.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We've had a great time discussing this. We would like it if you would like and subscribe and tell people about what we're doing here. And until then, we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us.